For so long, I was embarrassed. I had shame tied to that loss of time. And I say shame because people will ask you, how many years of service do you have? And then I have to tell them, well, I have this amount of years of service, but not all of them are good years. And then they're like, well, what do you mean not all good years? Because of course that ties to your retirement points and all of that. So for some people, I'd be like, I just, I was a bum soldier. But others, I did disclose, well, I was in an abusive relationship that I have, a bad year from that time, and I can't get that back. And let me tell you, when I look at my retirement points worksheet and I see that year that's a 0, it is a constant reminder of, yeah, I fell. I guess you could say I fell, but I got back up.
Welcome, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and produced by Markel Consulting, LLC. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. This is episode 69, and today I'm extremely privileged to have as my guest Command Sergeant Major Marisa Saucedo of the United States Army Reserve. Being a Command Sergeant Major is no small job, and it took Marisa a tremendous amount of strength and fortitude to get where she is today, not only in her position with the Army Reserve, but also in her civilian position as a program director for the Army's Sexual Harassment and Assault Response and Prevention Program. She's also a Sexual Assault Response Coordinator, and she talks about what's involved with that position during this interview. I would love to be the one to tell you all about Marisa and her strength and endurance in surviving sexual assault and interpersonal violence, and how she managed to get past the shame of almost being discharged from the Army Reserve, all because she was in an abusive relationship. But I'm going to let Marisa tell you, because this was an amazing interview. Here's Marisa. Marisa Saucedo, thank you so much for being a part of the SAS podcast. Welcome to this episode. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be asked to be on your show. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I know you're a busy woman. Things are really kind of keying back up for you now that the new year is over. And Happy New Year, by the way.
Happy New Year to you, 2024.
Yeah, here we are. Marisa, clarify for me, are you civilian or full-time?
I am reserve. I have 2 jobs. So I am a full-time civilian for the Army Reserve, and that's where I do my SARC duty, which is the Sexual Assault Response Coordinator. So I'm the Command SARC for a Reserve Command. And then I am also a green suitor in uniform as a reserve soldier. And that's where I am a Command Sergeant Major for a transportation battalion.
That's where the Command Sergeant Major came in. Yeah. And I remember you were just promoted to that, like in the fall of last year.
I was promoted 1 August, and I took responsibility of the battalion 26 August. So still fairly new in the seat, but hit the ground running and haven't stopped yet.
So if you would, tell the audience what a Sexual Assault Response Coordinator does.
Sure. So a Sexual Assault Response Coordinator, also known as a SARC, I think the easiest way for people to understand is like a traffic controller. So we are the liaison for all sexual assault cases, to include sexual harassment. The Army does handle sexual harassment, but we are the liaison. We talk to medical professionals if we need to, law enforcement, the command, legal, obviously the client or the soldier who is in need of services. So as a SARC, you are the case manager for a sexual harassment complaint or even a sexual assault report, and ensuring, processes are being handled or resources and support that the survivor is needing, that we are providing those or linking them, doing warm handoffs, whatever it is that the survivor needs in order to be supported, then that's our job in a nutshell. Obviously, there's a lot more, but that's, I guess, the easiest way that I explain to people is that we are like a traffic controller, ensuring all the stakeholders and people involved in the case are doing what they need to and providing effective communication across all platforms.
In that capacity, then, if I remember correctly from my days working for the Army, oftentimes a SARC can be a first responder, right? You may be the first person that somebody tells that they were sexually assaulted or harassed. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Not only can we be first responders, but also serve as the victim advocate. And I'll tell you now, I am managing a few cases that I was the initial person who did the intake, and that client requested to remain with me rather than having another victim advocate be assigned. And so sometimes that does happen as client feels more comfortable, like obviously not wanting to reshare and redo all the things, which as victim advocates, they don't ask them to reshare, but just being introduced to a whole new person can also be overwhelming. So you'll see in our field, a lot of SARCs are also dual-hatted as victim advocates for the same cases that they're managing.
Right.
So,
yeah. Mm-hmm. But then that's not always the case, as the situation may evolve in a different way. They may report to somebody else. The case might start rolling, and then you get involved or notified after an initial report is made, say maybe to a military police officer or to a commander or anybody. And then that person may then reach out and contact the SHARP program or a SARC.
That is correct. And that's also not uncommon to where a command or law enforcement will find out or be notified of an allegation of sexual assault. And then the SHARP personnel, which SHARP is the program that I work for, will come in after. And that's okay. Is there a process? Yes, but there's no formal protocol. So if a command finds out, that's okay. Especially now with the way some of the new policies and regulations have been updated, it really doesn't matter who's notified first. The soldier will always be afforded SHARP representation and all services, even if a command, this is a new, I say new, fairly new. It came out in November of 21 with one of the policy updates. But if a commander finds out there's an allegation of sexual assault, that soldier still has the eligibility to elect a restricted report. Now, that doesn't negate the duty and obligation that the commander has to notify law enforcement. That still has to happen because, as you know, a commander is a mandated reporter. But it does allow the client, the survivor, to elect a restricted report, meaning obviously they're not going to participate, they're still going to get all of the SHARP services. In my opinion, that was an awesome update and policy change that happened. There was one case in particular years ago that was not the case, and a soldier confided into her first sergeant, and rightfully so, she trusted and everything, but the first sergeant knew the moment that he was notified. He called our office, and I had to have a very tough and candid conversation with the client and explaining, not blaming at all, but just saying, hey, unfortunately at this time I can only offer you an unrestricted report. So now having that policy change, to me, it's a game changer, because now, okay, you told your commander, that's okay. What would you like to do? And so it puts the control back into the client's hands and allows them to make that choice and still, of course, be supported in the way that they feel they want to be supported at that time. So I really was happy with that new change that came out.
Right. So let's give our audience a little bit of an education where the military is concerned. You just mentioned the restricted versus unrestricted or non-restricted reporting process.
Sure.
And I think a lot of civilians don't even know that exists or what that means. Could you talk a little bit about the two different types of report paths?
Yes, there's 3 different reporting options.
Oh, okay.
And I'll go into that third here shortly, because that's also a new change as of this year. And just so you know, one thing with this program is it is continually changing for the better. And it's one of those programs where you have to continually stay abreast of, policy changes, updates, and all these things coming down from that spark with the NDAA and come down. But I digress. So for restricted reporting, that is where a soldier can get all the SHARP services, whether they need behavioral health, medical treatment, they can get a SAFE done, which is that sexual assault forensic examination. They can get that completed. They can even speak to an SVC, which is a Special Victims Counsel. So they get all of the services if they would like to include a victim advocate, but there's no investigation done. So chain of command is not notified. While the 1-star, the first general officer in the chain of command, is notified of a sexual assault within their footprint, there is no PII. So it looks something like, sir, ma'am, there's been a sexual assault within your footprint on this day and time. Survivor's doing well, or whatever, something along those lines. But there's no kind of identifying information. There's no unit. There's no gender, nothing to that nature. If it happened on an installation, it may say something that had happened in the barracks or something like that. And that's for like a safety, like if there needs to be lighting or something that the commander can take action on, more of like a safety perspective. But that's it. So the biggest differentiator between a restricted and unrestricted is the investigation. With a restricted report, there is no law enforcement or no investigation at all. Unrestricted is those same services coupled with the investigation, whether it's by CID or AFOSI or NCIS, which are all of those military criminal investigative offices, or even local law enforcement, which as a reserve SARC, we do work a lot with local law enforcement.
Yeah. Because
most of our soldiers are not in a duty status 24 hours a day like our active component soldiers.
Right.
So the biggest difference, again, between those two is the unrestricted report has an investigation that's tied to it. And again, it's only those that need to know. And then with a restricted report, there is no investigation. But for both reports, the soldier is entitled to all SHARP services, from medical treatment to behavioral health, victim advocacy services, SVC, chaplain, all of those resources that are available, we offer those to the soldier.
Right. And then you said there's a third path that is new.
Yes. So there's a program called the CATCH program. This program came out in 2019. I'll just give a brief history here of the CATCH program, which is short for Catch a Serial Offender. This system, what it did was back in 2019, it allowed, if the soldier elected to use it, any soldier who filed a restricted report, so again, one of those reports where there was no investigation, they could put the subject's information or any information that they had on that offender, name, tattoos, any kind of identifiable information, put that into this system, and it's anonymous. So the SARC would get a username and password from this database, provide it to the client, and they could go in and input this information. And what this database was created for was to catch those serial offenders. In the event, let's say someone puts in information and there's a match, then that respective SARC who provided that anonymous username and password to that client would get a call from one of the MCIO agents. And it would say, hey, for me, Ms. Saucedo, there's been a match based off of this case number that's in the system. Then it's my duty to inform that client to say, hi, there's been a match based off the information that you provided. And then that soldier then has three options. They can, one, convert their restricted report to an unrestricted report, then an investigation would be opened.
Right.
Two, they can elect to say, I don't want to do anything right now, but I want to stay in the CATCH program, and that's okay. And then the third option is just to, I guess you could say, disenroll or to quit utilizing the CATCH program. So again, everything is at the survivor's decision on what they want to do. Again, it was only open to those soldiers who elected a restricted report. In 2021, it was then opened up to soldiers, not only restricted, but unrestricted reports where the offender was unknown. So there are some cases where they just can't identify who the offender was for whatever reason. That was then an opportunity for that survivor to put that offender's information into the database to see, of course, if there eventually will be a match.
Right.
And most recently, the third option is now a soldier can come to my office, disclose that they were sexually assaulted. And of course, I would offer the option, would you like to file a report? They can elect to not file a report, but still utilize the CATCH program. So that's a big change, is that they don't have to file a report, which means that the command will never know because of course we have MRE 514, which is a type of privileged communication. So a soldier can come to my office, report that they were sexually assaulted, and I am not obligated to tell the command at all. And that soldier can elect to say, I want to utilize the catch program. And of course, there's another form that has to get filled out. But that soldier is also given an anonymous username and password to put that information into the catch database and input information on that alleged offender, to which, of course, if there is a match, the same process would happen. I, as the SARC, would get notified from the respective agency to say, hey, there's been a match. And then I go on and I offer those options to that soldier to see if they would eventually like to convert to an unrestricted report and then obviously be tied to an open investigation. That was a big change as well.
Yeah, and it sounds amazing. I'm really happy to hear that those changes have been implemented, because I know from my experience in working with the SHARP program, although I wasn't part of it, I worked in tandem with what was going on. And just so everybody knows, SHARP is the Sexual
Harassment, Assault Response, and Prevention.
In that process, though, I remember before these changes were implemented, there was a lot of frustration going on with SARCs within the SHARP program, and also investigators and attorneys, because there was so much confusion and so much disclosure that was happening that wasn't something that most soldiers wanted to have happen. And it caused some issues with the victim/survivor soldier, who then was, labeled or stuck with this concept that they were making waves in the unit and causing problems. And it seems like these changes that have been implemented eliminate a lot of that. Have you seen an increase in reporting because of these changes?
We have. I say our program office, yes, I have. I've been in the program since 2011. And we've made so many strides to better the program, and we're still continuing. There's still changes that are coming forth, trying to figure out how can we be victim-focused, victim-centered, how do we best support those survivors?
Right.
And to answer your question, yes, we have seen an uptick, at least in our command. Our command is fairly large. We've spread over 25 states. It's a lot of ground to cover, and we have seen more reports where it's been reported to the chain of command, and then soldiers are electing either restricted reporting, obviously unrestricted. So we are starting to see more reports, and these reports are actually new reports of old incident. To me, what it signifies is, okay, these soldiers have holding on to these events that have happened, and they've been carrying this load for so long, and now I think maybe because changes are happening and there's just, you can tell, at least like I said, in our command, it's a priority. I think soldiers are feeling like, okay, now I can speak up. I will be supported. I will be heard. I will be believed. And those things are very important. Of course, the process is, but being believed and supported, my goodness, goes so far with the client.
Yeah, it really does. In fact, that's part of why I wanted you to be on this show, is to explain what was going on in the military, but also to emphasize not only to people who listen to this show that are in the military, but also for the non-military listeners and audience, the scope of the problem within the military. It's vast. It's just like outside of the military, basically. Your own community, your own organization within the world culture. You've got the military culture, but as far as sexual assault, rape, those types of issues, nothing's all that different, except that it causes all kinds of problems within the operation of the military itself. When you've got sexual assault occurring and you've got, like you just mentioned, a serial offender who's assaulting multiple personnel within the military. A colleague of mine used to call it the enemy within, and that's exactly what it is, and it can be very destructive.
100%. And like how you said, we do mirror society. We mirror, you could say, college campuses. I'll say statistically, at least for those age ranges, when you look at the average age of victims and then you look at the average age of the subjects and all of those things, to include, as you were talking about the organization, institutional betrayal. That is a big one, because you have to think there's some people who join the Army to get away from wherever they were, whether it was their family, their bad home life, or whatever. That's just a fraction. But then they come into this organization that is seen almost like a family, right? A tribe type of effect. And then when something like that happens, you feel betrayed. We call ourselves brothers and sisters in arms. If you and I were in the unit together, Dave, I've got your back.
Right.
And if you're in a vulnerable state and I take advantage of that, that trust is broken. And that is really hard to repair, especially in an organization like the military. Having leaders speak up and having these candid conversations about supporting survivors or having zero tolerance, all of those things matter. To include our annual training, having the leadership there to talk about these hard topics and sensitive ones, it means much more than just having someone like me who has a passion for the program to go and train and teach. Well, people expect that because of my position. They're like, oh, well, of course you know this stuff, or of course you love talking about it because this is what you do all day. But then when you have a leader who is not fully immersed in it like I am, but then talk about it with such passion about support and the belief and those types of things, that goes a long way. When you can see that a leader is invested as much into the program as that subject matter expert is that's within the ranks, that to me speaks volumes. Those are things that will say that will help combat that institutional betrayal, where it's not the military or the organization, right? The Army, the Air Force, the Marine, that did that to me. No, it's that person did this. It just so happens that they're wearing that uniform. But if they have leadership that is supportive, genuinely supportive, because that too, people can see through that. And that's with anything, any type of relationship. You can always tell when someone is being very genuine in listening and talking and supporting someone through a process, or if it's just a check the block kind of things.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head with that, in the sense that when you've got commanders who are part of the problem and hiding or supporting or ignoring their knowledge of someone within their command that is a perpetrator, that just festers the problem even more. But when you've got somebody like you just said, who is maybe not as knowledgeable of all of the intricacies and complexities of how cases are reported and investigated and how restricted versus non-restricted reporting works, but still doing everything they can within their command to work on eliminating sexual assault within the ranks, that is a tremendous support of what it is that the SHARP program and SARCs are doing. And that's what's needed, is commanders that are just absolutely on board with everything that SHARP is designed to do, which is obviously to lower the prevalence of sexual assault within the ranks. But if we can be strong enough in what we're doing, like you are, Marisa, in terms of knowing your job and being as passionate about it as you are, and staying up with all those changes, which is what your job requires, but then educating the troops about all of this, it really speaks volumes to what is going on within the military. Yeah, it's good to have all that clarification. And I'm really glad that you're helping me in the process of educating the non-military audience that I've got with this program. But also, I know there are a lot of people in the military who do listen to this. So I'm very appreciative of your appearance on this episode and the things that you're talking about. One of the things that appealed to me in initially reaching out to you and talking to you is that you did talk to me a little bit about the fact that you yourself had been the victim of a sexual assault. And I'm wondering, Marisa, if you want to talk about that?
I can speak on that. And I think it ties heavily into what I do today and where I'm at. So I was in the military, E5, brand new E5. My offender was also in the military. It wasn't just the sexual violence. At the time, I just thought it was a bad relationship. That's what I chalked it up as. Being in this field, I learned fairly quickly that it was not just a bad relationship. It was what we now know today as intimate partner violence. It was physical abuse, emotional abuse. Obviously, the sexual abuse was there. This is one of those things. It almost ended my career. Even though I was a reserve soldier, this person that got to a point where he isolated me from my family and my friends, and I was not able to go to my battle assemblies. And so as a reserve soldier, if you get, we'll call them unexcused absences, if you get so many unexcused absences, they can, what we call administrative separate you or discharge you from the Army Reserve. I'll tell you, that's where I was. I was not allowed to go to battle assembly, and I can tell you that was the longest. Gosh, we met spring of 2003. So 2004, August 2004 was, I say it ended, but it ended when I drove myself to urgent care. I had an awesome battle buddy friend who, when I reached out, she went with me to the commander's office. I was getting these notices at my house, and I was so afraid to go back to my unit because I was a good soldier, Dave. I loved being in the reserve. I loved doing what I did. And it was like I guess the term nowadays, I ghosted everybody, right? I just fell off the face of the earth to this unit. And this was way before the SHARP program. This was, like I said, this is 2003, 2004 when all of this occurred. So my friend, she's amazing. She went with me to the commander's office in September. And I remember being in his office. I just knew that he was going to be like, you know what? Sorry, here's your packet. Just write me off. And he didn't do that. He believed me. He was a company commander, and he could have easily, for numbers' sake, just written me off on the books. And we had a long conversation that day, and I remember him asking me, what do you want? And I remember telling him, I want to be a soldier. I want to continue to serve. I want to come back, obviously, after explaining what I had been through that year that I was not there. And he gave me a second chance, Dave. He was like, he told me, he's like, you got one chance, here you go. And of course, we talked more. And let me tell you, Dave, I took that opportunity and I ran with it. I say I ran with it. As you know, as we spoke about at the beginning, I recently was promoted to Command Sergeant Major. And that commander I have kept in touch with since 2003. He was my company commander, but in 2004 was really that significant, pivotal moment in my life, in my career, where I was given that second chance. And every promotion since then, E6, E7, E8 was also significant. When I became a first sergeant, we had a long talk, but he was like, remember the chance that you were given. The way he believed me and the opportunity and the second chance that he gave me, that molded me into the leader that I am today. It helped me be a better first sergeant, I believe, because when soldiers had issues, they were brought to me as the first sergeant. That was always in the back of my mind. You never know what somebody is going through or what happens to them when they fall off, where'd they go, is asking those genuine questions, like, how can we help you? What happened? Those types of things. Granted, it is coupled probably with my nature to help people, which is why I'm in a human services profession as well. But that pivotal moment in 2004 just allowed me this opportunity to continue to serve this great nation. Like I said, being promoted to Command Sergeant Major and having him there in the audience, attending that promotion, it was very, I'll say, saltwater fell from my eyes to have him there. And I brought him up and I introduced him because not a lot of people, Dave, knew my story, a handful that I shared, because let me tell you, for so long, I was embarrassed. I had shame tied to that loss of time. And I say shame because people will ask you, how many years of service do you have? And then I have to tell them, well, I have this amount of years of service, but not all of them are good years. And then they're like, well, what do you mean not all good years? Because, of course, that ties to your retirement points and all of that. So for some people, I'd be like, I was a bum soldier. But others, I did disclose, well, I was in an abusive relationship that I have, a bad year from that time, and I can't get that back. And let me tell you, when I look at my retirement points worksheet and I see that year that's a 0, it is a constant reminder of, yeah, I fell. I guess you could say I fell, but I got back up. And I got back up because of that leader, that company commander, who, again, he could have just written me off and done the process. But he was that empathetic leader before we even started talking about empathetic leaders. He believed me. He genuinely cared for me as a person, not just a soldier in his command, but as a person. Obviously, he knew I was a good soldier because he did ask what had happened. I see the difference in leaders because my first line leader, never heard from that person. That was my first evaluation, right, as an NCO. I got a no in duty. That was hard to swallow. So I got a negative evaluation too. Rightfully so. I was not there that year. It looked like I did not adhere to duty, which is one of the Army values. And so again, that's just something too that I carry with me. And I think being older and wiser, I look at that and it's like, okay, when I talk to young soldiers and maybe they have a rough patch, I can let them know you can recover. Let me tell you why. And I've been more vocal, I think, as a senior leader, talking about my experience and what I went through. I didn't realize the effect it had on people until the first time I actually disclosed my story in a public setting in October of 21. And we did a domestic violence awareness walk at our command. And I wrote my story out, but I didn't put my name in it. We went on a mile walk, and every station, there were facts, and we talked about it. It was a full-time staff. It was a pretty good, maybe 50, 60 people. So it was a good size. And then the last station, our safety guy, he read the story. I remember when I handed it to him to read, and I said, "Can you read this?" And he was like, "Sure." This was before the event. And he read it, and then he saw that it was me at the end. And he looked at me, and I was like, "Yeah." I said, "Don't say anything." And he was like, "Okay." So we got to the end, and then he goes on, and he reads the story of this young E5 going through what she went through. And then at the end, and this was right before I left for the academy, and it ended with, the person in the story is your command SARC and has also been selected for the Sergeant's Major Academy. And I was standing off to the side. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Some of the guys were crying that were in. They were like, "Miss Saucedo." And I was like, oh gosh, I'm like, don't talk to me. Because then, I got emotional because that was the first time that I heard somebody else read what I went through. And then to see the impact that it had on my coworkers. One, obviously, they didn't even know that I had gone through all of that. And then to hear, oh my gosh, so many come up to me after and say, "Thank you for sharing. Me too." And then I was like, oh, and it was an array of young soldiers to senior civilians. And I was like, oh my gosh, all these years I had been ashamed to tell my story because I felt, like I said, I was embarrassed and I was ashamed that I was a bad soldier in my head, in my eyes. And I guess if you looked at me on paper, you'd be like, what happened here? You fell off the face of the earth. But when you really get to know me and understand what I went through, and then you realize all that I've had to overcome, because, that wasn't the only trauma that I've gone through in my life, but that was probably one of the most significant because it almost ended my career as a soldier. Now, I was not in a SARC position then, so if my career had ended back then, I would not be in this position that I am now to help other soldiers who have been through similar situations that I've been in. And so when I get in front of leadership and soldiers and I talk about just, the education and how we can support, oh my gosh, people come up to me and they're like, "You have a passion." And I'm like, I know, but I don't share my story with everyone, but it's evident that I do care. And I mean, I'm sharing with you now. You know why I care is because I've been there.
Yeah.
I know what it's like to have leaders who don't check on you, like that first line leader, or having that commander who could have easily taken the easy route. But you know what? He took a risk on me coming back. And that right there, oh my gosh, he's one of my mentors. He's a very good friend of mine, still to this day. That was a defining moment in my life that molded me to the leader that I am today. And then, of course, now I'm in the SHARP program as a SARC. And so I tell people I've finally figured out what I want to do when I grow up, which is I want to help soldiers who have been sexually assaulted, sexually harassed. And I want to educate leaders. I want to educate soldiers. I want to be I guess you could say, a difference maker, a change maker for this program. I know I'm only one person, but my passion is to influence as many people as I can in my circle to kind of have that same fervor for prevention, just advocating for survivors, doing all those things that come along with our program, and then all the other programs as well, on how SHARP is coupled with equal opportunity, suicide prevention, the alcohol and drug, because all of those programs are like a spider web, and educating people that sexual assault is not just stovepipe. It affects so many other areas of a person's life. And I think if there would have been a program like SHARP and how we talk about the education and the resources and all of that that's out there now, I think if I would have been educated, I would have known earlier on, this is not just a bad relationship. I can report this and I can get help. I can be supported. I will be believed. So seeing where this program has evolved and continues to evolve, it gives me hope, Dave. It really does. I'm thankful to be a part of this program. Even though I know I'm only one person, I'm thankful that I'm in a position that I can influence soldiers, commanders, leaders at all levels, how to care, how to be that supporting leader that soldiers do need.
Well, and not only supportive, but knowledgeable. It sounds to me from the way you're talking that you know that telling your story, it doesn't even have to get into all the nitty-gritty detail. If you just tell your story to a small extent, the impact of that alone can change your life. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you evolved in your progression of healing to the point where you got rid of that shame?
Oh, yeah. So it was not easy, I'll tell you that. What catapulted me into, I guess you could say, sharing my story was, well, Dave, this is one of those things that I'm like, but it's part of my life, is I got into another abusive relationship. And this one was not of sexual abuse, but manipulative, gaslighting, emotional, psychological abuse. I mentioned this to a friend when we were talking over the holidays. And I remember saying, I would take that physical abuse over that psychological abuse any day. Obviously, someone on the outside hearing that, they're like, what? But for the way that last relationship brought me to my lowest of lows, obviously doing the program and being in that, so having to deal with that, and then you deal with the case, the workload. Now there was so much stress happening in my mind. And then you add, I invited a survivor to talk who then was speaking, and it triggered, like I said, there's been a lot of things that I've gone through in my life. One of which I was sexually assaulted on my graduation night. I was not in the Army. I just turned 18. It was the night before my birthday. And so that came to surface, which I had packed away for so long. Obviously, not dealing with coming out of that relationship in 2004, I kept packing things away. And so in late 2019, I got out of that toxic, abusive relationship. I'll say it catapulted me into behavioral health because I felt myself falling apart mentally. I had lost myself. I didn't know where I was. Even my friends who were with me on this journey, I was just not me. I remember I deployed early 2020, which I think was a good thing for me because I know that manipulative person would have eventually made their way back into my life. And so that behavioral health journey, oh my gosh, Dave, that was rough. I learned a lot about me. I had to forgive myself for a lot of things. I had to show myself grace. Obviously, there was a lot of anger in processing a lot of things that I went through. I mean, there was also a lot of understanding. I don't have to continue to be this way, if you will, for myself. I still go to behavioral health. I go on the regular. And I'll tell you that first year was really rough. That was peeling back the onion on a lot of things, seeing some similarities in relationships when I look at one from the 2004 to the one from 2018 and 19. Having to break a lot of those norms that I was, in a sense, comfortable with because I didn't really know any other way. I learned a lot about codependency, and I'm sure we could do another podcast on that. But I realized I was codependent at its finest. I mean, 100%. But going through behavioral health and working on myself and peeling back the onion, I am aware of things that trigger me or things that I know are not healthy for me. I learned how to say no, Dave. Let me tell you, that was a big one. I learned how to say no. I learned how to establish boundaries. And every behavioral health session that I've had, I'm such an advocate for behavioral health. And I tell soldiers, my friends, I'm like, go to behavioral health. It is amazing. Because there is that stigma. If I go to behavioral health, they're going to think I'm crazy or that I'm a weak soldier or that I'm this or that, or you fill in the blank. There's so many things out there or labels. There's so many labels out there tied to seeking behavioral health.
Yeah.
Behavioral health has been a true asset for me to be a better advocate, to be a better daughter, friend, sister, again, fill in the blank to all of those roles that I have, even a leader, because it's almost like that analogy on the airplane when they tell you put the mask on yourself first.
Yeah.
I can't be my best for others, especially in my profession, or even as a leader, as a mom, if I am not really taking care of myself mentally, emotionally. The self-care, wow, I didn't used to do that a lot, and now I'm getting better. Like I said, I unplugged for the New Year weekend, and I'll tell you, my boyfriend was like, you didn't bring your laptop? And I was like, nope, I really unplugged. And let me tell you, that was very difficult. Small disclaimer, I still had my work phone, but I'm getting better. It's those baby steps. Learning that even things as simple as that, as unplugging for 3 or 4 days, makes a world of difference. I think to just really hone in on what got me past the shame was that October 2021 event where I shared just a blurb. I mean, it was literally not even a full page. It was just a blurb as the safety officer was reading. Seeing the impact that it had on I say random, but they were my coworkers, but literally random strangers that I had never shared that. And then seeing the impact it had on them, I think I was like, oh, wow, it's okay to share. And I think hearing from younger soldiers who came up to me and were like, can we go to lunch? I would like to talk more. And I saw myself in them. Holy smokes. If somebody would have shared with me when I was a young E4, if I would have heard someone's story where I could be like, oh my gosh, me too, I'm going through that too. And then obviously you fast forward and I have these 2 E4s that reminded me of me. I think that was where it kind of just came full circle. You have to share your story. Now, granted, it's not like I'm going out and doing all these things, but I share it when we get into conversations, whether it's in training or, just in speaking with people in general about my journey. I'll share just little snippets, the impact that you can see that it has on them. And they're like, what? You almost? And I'm like, yeah, I was an unsat. Can you tell somebody in the reserve that you were an unsat and then they look at you and you're a command sergeant major? They're like, whoa, what? How did that happen? And so, you share a little bit. I was in an abusive relationship and I lost a year of my service. I just say that and they're just amazed. Oh my gosh, I can recover from having 2 months of not showing up. You stand up, you brush yourself off and you keep going. The more and more I share my story, the more that shame fades away. It's almost now to say, I have overcome this. I have a overcomer mentality now where it's obviously thank you to my commander who gave me that second chance. Man, I have overcome a lot. I am strong. I persevered through those things that I went through, and I'm still here. I've got to share this because somebody else is going through something probably more traumatic than what I went through. Not to dismiss what I went through, but this is me. This is my story, and it obviously was traumatic for me as a young E5, but seeing where I've come from and what I've overcome and what I've accomplished, wow, it's overwhelming in a good way. Yeah. For me. Mm-hmm. And that shame has now gone to the wayside because now I can say, yeah, that happened to me, but it did not define me. I owe it all to my commander back then who gave me that second chance. I believe he's my angel. He provided me that opportunity because if not, who knows where I would be right now, honestly.
Well, I understand that, and I appreciate that you give him a lot of that credit but I think a lot of credit goes to you. And I tell people this all the time, that one of the major first steps to healing is telling your story. That's the premise of this whole show. And that's why Sexual Assault Survivor Stories exists. That name says it all. And you've hit the nail on the head with the things that you've said in terms of that one episode, that experience of sharing with others your experience and the impact that you saw that story had on all those people that heard it and came up to you.
Yeah.
Is profound.
Oh, it was so powerful. I was overwhelmed at their reaction, that they were so supportive and thankful that I shared.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's almost like, I don't know, they needed to hear it, or I don't know what it was, but it was very encouraging to see my coworkers respond the way they did. I mean, it was uplifting.
Would you call that a defining moment in your healing process?
You know what? I sure would, because, yeah, in just a matter of moments, I had people that, I mean, you literally pass in the hallway coming up to me. Can I give you a hug? Thank you. Yeah, I would definitely say that moment in October of 2021, when I actually shared part of my story, that, yeah, it was definitely profound.
Yeah,
for sure. I think for the survivors out there that have not told their story, that's okay.
Yeah.
I think for the survivors that are contemplating telling their story, we believe you. I think for those, and going back to those who haven't told their story, you are supported and you are believed. I think that even for me, if I look back, like, gosh, it took, what was that, 2004, and I didn't share my story until 2021. Gosh, and even then it took other instances in my life, you know, obviously catapulted me into behavioral health and really getting the courage to speak up. But I think my message to all survivors is, no matter where you are in your journey, you are an overcomer. You are a survivor. No matter if you choose to share your story with one person or 100 people, or on a podcast, or in front of your coworkers, whatever you feel like. I guess I would never want a survivor to feel obligated, but I'll say to survivors out there, you'll know when it's time. I didn't know. I knew when I was planning the event, because that was our second domestic violence awareness event. You know, I had done one the year prior and didn't even come to me to share my story. It was a successful event, you know, with everything else that we did, but something in me was, it's time. Just let's try it. You know, I tried it, and obviously the response was overwhelming in a good way. So I think for those survivors out there who have not shared or even contemplating sharing, like, you'll know.
Yeah.
You'll know when it's time. You'll know. And no matter what, you are believed, and you are so strong just to even think about sharing your story. But when you do share, oh my gosh, the impact of speaking up and saying, me too. Those two words, Dave, me too, man.
Powerful stuff, right? Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Yes. When you have people come up and say, me too, it's almost like an instant bond with that person. And I don't even have to know specifically what you went through.
Mm-mm.
But for you to come up and say, me too, meaning we have both been through just the mess, right?
Yeah.
Here we are,
yeah,
together, standing on our own 2 feet. Yeah, those words, me too, definitely some powerful words right there.
Absolutely. I think that movement even is a turning point in our generation in terms of starting
on
a grassroots level to help lower the prevalence of rape and sexual assault.
My goodness, Dave, yes, it got so many people talking about just that taboo topic. Oh, yeah, the Me Too movement was definite, just powerful movement that enabled conversations to be had in homes, in workplaces, amongst friend groups, in organizations.
On podcasts.
Yes, and for sure, definitely on podcasts.
Yep.
You know, that movement, so powerful for people to share their stories. And I guess I will say is that I hope more survivors come forward and share their story, because their story is important. Their story needs to be heard. And I know that my story needs to be heard. And, one thing that I do mention when I talk to leaders and I give trainings and things like that is I always mention, just so you know, I guarantee there are survivors amongst us right now who have never shared anything with anyone at all. And it's my reminder to them. I said, so be mindful of the things that you say, the jokes that you laugh at, all those I tell them, I said, be mindful. I said, because somebody could be preparing to share or confide, but if they see you as a leader acting a certain way or saying certain things, you could shut that down and not even know it. And so sometimes it kind of causes like a quietness in the group, but I'm like, good, because it's getting them to think about, I do need to be mindful of the things I say or the things I laugh at or stereotype or any of those things that could really shut someone down.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that. I am so glad that you're here. Marisa, what do you do in the healing process after you've revisited some of the things that we've revisited in terms of the abuse and the assault? That always triggers memories and thought processes that you probably weren't anticipating thinking about when you agreed to be on this episode. The after effect of talking about it again can have an impact that needs to be addressed. And so my question to you is, what do you do to help take care of yourself? And what will you do for the rest of the evening for handling these issues that come up in your memory and in your thought processes?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's actually really good. One of my self-care routines is exercise. I have converted my garage into a gym. I mean, when I say a gym, I have a squat rack, I have a bench press, I have a treadmill, I have a rower, I have a Peloton bike. Exercise is my way to relax. And I know that sounds funny, but it is. I will tell you, I do deal with anxiety. There are times when I get very anxious. Like even right now, I do feel like I just want to go for a run. Might be what I end up doing. Yeah. Even if it's running just a mile, to get that out, that is what helps me. Also, I chase races. I sign up for Ragnar Trail races.
Awesome.
I recently did a High Rocks fitness competition. So those things, and whatever it is, maybe it's the feeling of overcoming something difficult, because none of those things are easy. Yeah. The feeling I get after is like, I just did that. And so to answer your question is exercise. I need it. It grounds me. It really does. That is something that I'm thankful that I still can. I mean, I still have my aches and pains, my back and my ankle, they hurt every day, but I'm still thankful that I am able to move and do those things to get that anxiousness away from me. And then what I'm going to do tonight is, aside from exercise, I'm also going to eat. So I'm a foodie too. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's, I have a balance. I'm not one of those exercise, junkies. I probably exercise so I can eat. I do love food. Yeah. Right now it's going to be deciding, do I want to eat first, wait a bit, and then exercise, or knock it out first and then enjoy a good meal. So that'll be my evening. And then, like I said, winding down and get ready for another day tomorrow.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Marisa, thank you so much for being willing to be on this show and tell your story. The impact that you being on this show is going to have, I think, is immense. And I know listeners are going to hear this and be so appreciative of your presence here.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about what I do, but more importantly, to share my story and get it out there. And I really appreciate you, Dave. You are an amazing individual for what you do and allowing survivors like me to share our story and to have this platform. Yeah, this is your podcast, but you're really doing it for us. And I cannot thank you enough for what you do. You're an amazing human being, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those kind words, Marisa. I appreciate your sentiments. It means the world to me. It really does. It helps me ground myself and keep doing what I'm doing.
You should continue, for sure.
Thanks. I want to do this again. Your insights and your experiences, your job are so impactful and so powerful. I know you're helping people day in and day out get through their traumas and their horrific, hellish experiences. It's people like you, and especially you, who has that inner drive to be an important part of somebody's life who's experienced interpersonal violence of any kind. And being here and willing to share it has been a pure treasure. So thank you so much. Let's talk again soon.
I would like that. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good evening.
You do the same.
I'm off to exercise.
Yeah. Have a good one. Enjoy.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. My deepest gratitude and appreciation go out to Marisa Saucedo. I want to encourage each of you to reach out to her on LinkedIn or Instagram and tell her how amazing she is and what a fantastic job she did of sharing her story and letting us be a part of her efforts to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. I also want to thank each of you for being a listener to this podcast. It's amazing to see the growth that SAS is experiencing and to know that you are helping to do your part in bringing justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. You are also helping when you start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been affected by rape or sexual assault. I'll be back next Tuesday with another great episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. My guest will be Plamen Dragunov, and you won't want to miss hearing his story of rape and his powerful journey of healing. We'll see you next week.